Welcome to a new episode from the Curiosity Lab. Think back to a moment when collective anxiety felt absolutely overwhelming. Maybe it was a stock market crash, the immediate aftermath of a public crisis, or the surreal moment during the last global health scare when shelves were emptied of essentials. Why did perfectly rational individuals suddenly morph into a unified, fearful herd, making decisions, like panic buying, that seemed to defy logic and self-interest? The secret lies in realizing that you are not an island. You are a living, breathing node within a colossal social network. For centuries, sociologists and scientists have observed that ideas, emotions, and behaviors spread through social ties, much like any highly infectious agent. These ripples of influence are far more powerful than we traditionally imagine. Researchers examining vast data sets, such as the long-running Framingham Heart Study, FHS, and the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent Health, ADHealth, have documented quantifiable evidence of this spread. They found that fundamental human experiences, everything from obesity and smoking habits to feelings of happiness, loneliness, and even divorce, don't stop with your closest friends. They ripple outwards, touching lives further down the line. We are talking about a phenomenon called social contagion, and it's the invisible psychological force that shapes mass reality. But if emotions and habits are contagious, why isn't the world one giant homogeneous pool of shared opinions? Why do we see deep, bitter polarization, where communities seem determined to live in warring echo chambers, incapable of understanding the other side? And most critically for this discussion, how do we separate manufactured mass fear from genuine, rational danger? Today, we are decoding the secret architecture of group panic dynamics. We will expose the remarkable scientific limits of how far your social influence actually extends. We will unpack the insidious psychological traps, the copycat trap and the consensus trap that make us surrender our individual truth for the comfort of the crowd. And we will reveal how modern systems amplify collective anxiety by manipulating the very way your brain processes fear. Get ready to confront the hidden systems that shape your world, because once you understand how this contagion works, you can finally build an immunity to panic. Let's begin by establishing the mathematical limits of social influence. Think of yourself as throwing a pebble into a gigantic pond. How far do those ripples reach before they disappear into the surface tension? Scientists tracking thousands of people over decades in networks like the Framingham Heart Study were able to reconstruct ties spanning many years, revealing the spread of traits across individuals. These studies identified a compelling and consistent observation they termed the 3 degrees of influence rule. This isn't a hard and fast law of nature, but an observed regularity demonstrating that your influence generally reaches your friend, 1 degree, your friend's friend, 2 degrees, and your friend's friend's friend, 3 degrees. Beyond that third step, the effect usually fades out, becoming statistically undetectable. This is potent real-world influence. When we talk about contagion, we are discussing the statistical likelihood that a behavior or state will spread through these social connections, affecting everything from marijuana use and sleep habits to heavy drinking and cooperation. For instance, clusterings of traits like obesity or happiness extends to 3 degrees of separation in networks that researchers have studied. Now, researchers caution that when they observe clusters of people acting similarly, like finding that all your friends have similar body mass indexes, there are 3 major potential explanations, only one of which is true contagious influence. 1. Induction, true contagion. This means the behavior truly spread. Your friend's choice, example, to take up running, caused you to make the same choice. Homophily, birds of a feather. This means you were already similar. You chose your friends because they shared similar habits, attitudes, or genetics already. Confounding, shared event. This means an external factor influenced you both simultaneously. Maybe a new gym opened near both your offices, leading both you and your friend to start exercising independently. The challenge for science is pulling these apart, which requires complex longitudinal data showing when the action occurred and when the relationship formed. What is clear is that this spread of influence, often involving health and emotional states, is real, measurable, and potent up to a surprisingly limited distance in the social architecture. This finite, 3-degree reach ensures that, while local clusters form, one individual's influence cannot quickly overwhelm the entire planet. But what happens when that predictable, local influence suddenly turns into mass panic? Panic doesn't begin with a rational calculation of risk, it begins with an irrational fear of disagreement. Imagine a scenario where you are desperately waiting for a life-saving organ. You get the call, a viable kidney is available. But before you, 19 other people on the list refused it. What do? Most people panic and say no. Why? They fall into the copycat trap. They substitute their own medical need and their doctor's professional advice for the supposedly superior wisdom of the anonymous crowd. They assume 19 smart people rejected it, there must be something terribly wrong that I don't know about. They risk death simply because they followed the perceived consensus. We do this because our need to belong is fundamentally primal. Our brains process the psychological agony of social rejection or ostracism in a similar way to how they process physical pain. It physically hurts to be wrong or cast out. This deep-rooted fear of embarrassment is the lever that conformity uses to move the world. This fear quickly leads us into the consensus trap, or what researchers call a collective illusion. A collective illusion is a widespread social misperception where a majority of people privately believe one thing, but incorrectly assume the majority publicly believes something else, causing everyone to conform to the false norm. How does silence create a massive false reality? Because when dissent is absent, either intentionally or unintentionally, silence is interpreted as agreement. This silent consensus is pernicious because it doesn't feel like deceit. It feels like hedging your survival bets. When you observe others hoarding goods, you assume they know something you don't. You believe their behavior is based on some secret, accurate information you are missing. This accelerates the panic, ensuring that everyone remains silent about their private doubts while publicly performing the perceived anxiety. We conform because we are hardwired to stick with the group, and finding ourselves out of step triggers an internal error signal that tells us something is wrong, prompting us to shift our perception to align with the crowd. When collective illusions of fear spread, they can physically manifest into sickness. This is the realm of mass hysteria, or when physical symptoms result purely from psychological distress, mass psychogenic illness, or MPI. The fuel for this fire is the nocebo effect. We know the placebo effect. Believing a sugar pill will heal you sometimes makes you better. The nocebo effect is the dark mirror. Believing you will become ill can actually generate genuine, measurable symptoms, manifesting a self-fulfilling prophecy. Anxiety, stress, and fear create real physical symptoms like headaches, weakness, or trouble breathing. History is full of clear examples of this power. In 1938, listeners famously panicked during the radio broadcast of War of the Worlds, genuinely believing Martians were invading, demonstrating how easily fear is contagious and bypasses critical thinking. A more modern case occurred in Portugal. After a TV soap opera showed characters contracting a deadly virus, over 300 students subsequently reported similar symptoms, rashes and breathing difficulties, leading several schools to close. The investigation confirmed the frightening truth. There was no virus. The sickness was caused purely by mass anxiety transmitted through media. Now consider what happens when political powers leverage this proven psychological vulnerability. This brings us to the political economy of the audacious lie. When leaders and information channels engage in extreme rhetorical strategies, they know that the broad masses, the largest demographic group, are easily influenced by emotion rather than conscious reasoning. The technique relies on the fundamental truth that individuals are accustomed to hearing small, conventional untruths, but they cannot conceive that others would have the impudency to distort the truth so colossally and infamously. If an untruth is enormous enough, repeated often enough, and appeals directly to public emotions and biases, like their fears or hopes, people are more likely to believe it because their critical filter is bypassed. The ancient ruler Ramesses the Great understood this power, creating massive carved scenes on temple walls, reporting a stunning military victory that was, in reality, a stalemate. The goal isn't just to deceive, it's to generate a massive emotional response that drowns out reason and critical thought. If fear is so easily contagious, why don't we just see endless, selfish chaos? Why does shared distress sometimes trigger heroic, cooperative actions? The difference lies in a crucial neurological distinction observed in studies of social animals: the opposite effects of fear contagion and pain contagion. When an animal observes a peer exhibiting distress related to a threat or danger, that's fear contagion. The observed effect in rodents is almost uniformly social avoidance behavior. This response is rooted in instinctual self-preservation. The fear signal indicates potential danger, so the best reaction is to distance oneself to mitigate personal risk. This results in antisocial behavior prioritizing self-interest. However, when an individual observes a peer experiencing clear, identifiable physical pain, that's pain contagion. This triggers a fundamentally different response: social approach and caring/helping behaviors. This prosocial reaction is rooted in an empathetic response, activating neural circuits associated with personal suffering. In experiments, this manifests as physical comforting acts like licking the pain site, licking, or communal grooming to alleviate the peer's distress. Importantly, pain contagion aligns more closely with the concept of true empathy than fear contagion does. Think of a crisis. If authorities frame the emergency as a generalized, unseen, unprecedented threat, fear contagion, the public instinctively retreats into selfish hoarding and avoidance. The panic focuses on the unknown killer, triggering raw self-interest. But if the crisis highlights visible, genuine, and localized suffering or injury, pain contagion, our natural empathetic circuits activate, compelling us toward cooperation and helping behavior. The ultimate outcome, a society collapsing into self-interested chaos or uniting in crisis response, is often determined by which emotion takes hold: the anonymous generalized fear that pushes us away, or the immediate visible pain that draws us together in empathy. The moment collective anxiety meets centralized power is the moment mass hysteria becomes most dangerous, because systems can remove the natural limits on panic. In a highly decentralized system, like an idealized minimal state, mass hysteria has built-in correction mechanisms. First, the concept of enforcing property rights acts as a fundamental limit on destruction. Even panicking individuals cannot massively violate the liberty of those who choose to ignore the panic. Second, citizens who refuse to succumb to the hysteria and live their normal lives, continuing to work, socialize, and breathe freely, act as essential wake-up calls. This minority provides objective, observable proof that the threat might be exaggerated, allowing anxious observers to adjust their fears. This decentralization promotes competition in solutions, error detection, and correction. However, the nature of the modern centralized state often actively amplifies hysteria. First, restricting natural relief. The state wields the power to inhibit the very activities that naturally reduce anxiety and fear, such as socialization, sports, and normal community interactions. Mandating isolation and mandatory restrictive measures imposes massive psychological strain, providing the fertile emotional ground required for mass hysteria to flourish. Second, citizens who refuse to succumb to the hysteria and live their normal lives, continuing to work, socialize, and breathe freely, act as essential wake-up calls. This minority provides objective, observable proof that the threat might be exaggerated, allowing anxious observers to adjust their fears. This decentralization promotes competition in solutions, error detection, and correction. However, the nature of the modern, centralized state often actively amplifies hysteria. First, restricting natural relief. The state wields the power to inhibit the very activities that naturally reduce anxiety and fear, such as socialization, sports, and normal community interactions. Mandating isolation and mandatory restrictive measures imposes massive psychological strain, providing the fertile emotional ground required for mass hysteria to flourish.
Second, the state monopolizes the crisis response, forcing its centralized solution and suppressing alternative approaches. When alternatives are forbidden, those crucial wake-up call role models disappear. This centralization accelerates groupthink, a powerful psychological force that demands consensus and violently suppresses dissent and the evaluation of alternatives, meaning the hysteria feeds upon itself. Third, negative news delivered by authoritative sources, especially state-aligned experts and officials, is particularly damaging to public psychological health. When officials, speaking with the full authority of the state, deliver alarming warnings, they legitimize and accelerate the mass anxiety. Fourth, the incentive to exaggerate. Political leaders face a deeply asymmetrical reward system. Underestimating a threat and failing to act leads to political ruin. However, exaggerating a threat and imposing bold interventions, like mass restrictions, often results in being celebrated as a decisive hero. The costs of this overreaction can easily be passed on to the public. This systemic incentive guarantees that politicians are strongly motivated to overshoot the mark and inflate the danger, nurturing a pervasive culture of fear. Thus, the centralized power of the modern state creates the perfect conditions for mass hysteria to take hold, often leading to significant policy errors that compromise public health and liberty.
Now we address the greatest mystery of social influence. If culture and opinions spread contagiously, why are we seeing a societal divide, splitting us into fiercely opposed camps? The simple answer is, ideas don't spread like a flu virus, they spread through associative diffusion. Let's simplify this technical concept completely. When you interact with someone, you are not just checking off a binary box. Do I adopt their belief or not? Instead, you are absorbing how they organize the world. You are learning the cultural package. Associative diffusion argues that what is truly transmitted is the perceived compatibility between different concepts, the social meaning of what goes with what. Take a controversial topic like vaccination attitudes. Historically, vaccines were simply medical choices, but through associative diffusion, narratives reframed the issue. Now, opposition to vaccines often clusters among parents who also prioritize organic food, home births, and exhibit profound distrust toward major corporations. The actual thing spreading isn't just the belief vaccines are bad, it's the new association that says rejecting institutional health authority is symbolically compatible with buying organic and embracing individualism. This mechanism creates a paradoxical situation that fuels polarization. 1. Interpretive consensus. The entire society, regardless of political affiliation, starts to agree on the meaning of the cultural packages. Everyone knows that organic food and skepticism toward big business belong in the same symbolic bundle. They share the cultural map. 2. Evaluative disagreement. But they violently disagree on whether that package is good or bad. One group sees that package as enlightened freedom, and the other sees it as dangerous, irrational, anti-science. When you talk to someone on the opposite side, you aren't fighting over facts. You are fighting over the evaluation of the same cultural packages. Crucially, the structure of this shared understanding means that further interaction only strengthens the perceived constraints, pushing people toward more balanced yet equally opposing preferences. This psychological symmetry, which naturally separates beliefs into tightly knit clusters of opposition, is precisely what locks society into bitter, sharply defined divisions.
If associative diffusion is the underlying psychological mechanism of polarization, then modern digital technology is the global infrastructure that weaponizes it, turning subtle disagreements into sharp battle lines. We live in the era of user-generated content, or UGC, where every individual is both a broadcaster, disseminator, and an audience member. This ubiquitous connectivity speeds up the creation of echo chambers and extreme polarization. The creation of the echo chamber relies on two fundamental dynamics working together. 1. Human confirmation bias. We naturally seek and privilege information that aligns with our existing beliefs and actively filter out anything that disagrees with us. It feels satisfying to be right. 2. Algorithmic reinforcement. Social media platforms operate on a business model designed to maximize your time connected. Algorithms detect your bias and respond by filtering your feed even further, proposing content that strictly aligns with your viewpoint. The result is a self-reinforcing, highly personalized illusion of consensus. You look at your feed, see nothing but affirmation, and falsely believe that your extreme viewpoint is the universally accepted reality. This amplified environment also dictates how polarized society becomes depending on the network structure. Research has identified two contrasting outcomes based on how information diffuses. Scale-free networks, mass media or influencers, these are defined by centralized bulletin boards or major influencers, a few nodes with enormous connectivity. When cultural diffusion spreads along these patterns, polarization becomes crisper, sharper, and unidimensional. Meaningfulness, the strength of the cultural packages, is significantly higher in these environments because information spreads rapidly and widely, coordinating interpretations across the masses. Small world networks, tight-knit groups. These networks consist of localized, intensely interconnected cliques, like friend circles or small communities. Diffusion here is fuzzier, resulting in more complex, fragmented differentiation along multiple cultural axes. Consensus is weaker because information flow is restricted. The modern media landscape, dominated by powerful global platforms and highly visible celebrity voices, heavily favors the scale-free structure, pushing society toward crisp, two-sided, emotionally charged polarization.
The most visceral manifestation of collective anxiety is panic buying behavior, PBB, the irrational scramble to hoard goods the moment a crisis is announced. To decode this, we turn to the classic stimulus-organism response, SOR, framework. 1. The stimulus, S. Perceived scarcity, PS. Panic begins not with a factual shortage, but with the perception or belief that essential resources might soon become limited or unattainable. This perception is a powerful driver because it motivates a person to increase purchases due to the urgency and the perceived value of the vanishing commodity. The moment you see an empty shelf or hear a rumor of a lockdown, this scarcity cue takes hold. 2. The organism, O. Anxiety, AY. Perceived scarcity acts as a strong external stimulus that immediately triggers anxiety. Anxiety is defined as a broad, ambiguous feeling of unease, tension, and worry about potential future threats. Unlike fear, anxiety often lacks a defined target, making it feel uncontrollable. In this model, anxiety is the crucial mediator. Shortages don't directly cause panic buying. The shortages cause the anxiety, and the anxiety drives the irrational response. 3. The response, R. Panic buying behavior, PBB. The intense emotional distress caused by anxiety compels individuals toward risk-averse, self-protective actions. Panic buying acts as a desperate, internal coping strategy to alleviate the emotional turmoil and regain a sense of security during uncertainty. Buying 60 bottles of hand sanitizer is less about future need and more about minimizing present emotional distress.
This mechanism creates a self-reinforcing cycle. The initial act of impulsive purchasing driven by anxiety over scarcity quickly leads to the item selling out even faster, which increases the perception of scarcity for everyone else, thus generating more anxiety. What about external controls? While government interventions, like public supply reassurances or price caps, are intended to interrupt this cycle, empirical evidence suggests they often fail to significantly reduce the crucial link between anxiety and panic buying. This is because the emotional response of deep-seated anxiety and fear takes precedence over the logical assurances provided by centralized measures. Governmental actions frequently miss the fundamental psychological triggers that are driving the irrational, self-preserving behavior.
We have traveled deep into the hidden mechanics of social panic. We learned that the power of influence, though real, fades quickly across the social landscape. We decoded the copycat trap, understanding that our deep-seated fear of being ostracized compels us to conform to a collective illusion that often doesn't reflect anyone's true private belief. We saw how the type of perceived crisis matters immensely. Anonymous fear leads to selfish avoidance, while visible pain unlocks deep human empathy and pro-social helping. And we observed how centralized power structures and algorithms can amplify anxiety by shutting down the natural corrective forces in society. The question remains, how do you break free from a system designed to keep you anxious, compliant, and polarized? The answer lies in cultivating congruence. Congruence means aligning your inner belief system with your outward actions. It is the conscious commitment to live honestly, acknowledging that living deceptively, even if only to fit in, creates profound internal conflict, anxiety, and a loss of mental well-being. Think of the story of the greengrocer in an oppressive regime, forced daily to display a propaganda sign he despised. His simple act of compliance symbolized the entire system built on lies. The philosopher Václav Havel explained that the moment the greengrocer chose to stop conforming, the moment he lived in truth, he didn't just reclaim his integrity, he enabled everyone to peer behind the curtain. He showed them the emperor was naked, inspiring a collective awakening. You and I have that exact same power. The systems that foster collective illusions are fragile. The powerful psychological forces of social contagion break down when confronted by individual integrity. The simple act of checking your impulse, prioritizing your true judgment over the anxious crowd, cultivating diverse perspectives, and refusing to perpetuate a lie, even a small one, can be the catalyst for immense social change. It is never too late to start aligning your private and public selves. If this video helped you think more clearly about the unseen forces that shape our world, share it. You aren't just sharing information, you are sharing the vital tool of critical awareness, helping others break free from the consensus trap. Click subscribe to continue the journey with The Curiosity Lab, where we deconstruct the hidden systems that shape human nature and modern society. Until next time, be curious and live in truth.